Hi everybody, it's Kayla. Today I'm going to be talking about the lunar eclipse in Scorpio on May 16th. As an astrologer, it's my job to tell you not to worry, to not freak out, especially when it comes to like Scorpio things. People typically think it's more heightened when it comes to them dying or accidents happening. And I'm not going to say that, there's not a possibility that could happen around an eclipse, because eclipses do point to destabilizing events, right? Especially when we have Uranus involved. Uranus is very unpredictable. It tends to kind of throw a wrench in the mix. However, when it comes to Scorpio and Scorpio ruling death, you do not need to worry that if you see something happening in your chart involving Scorpio, that you're going to die, because everybody has Scorpio in their chart, first of all. And, regardless of if you have Scorpio placements, even if you do, you're just someone who really embodies the life and death process in your life a little bit more. So this like regenerative, era of your life where you close the door on one thing and open the door on another, that's just energy that you're more familiar with. However, because we're having not only a full moon, but an eclipse full moon in Scorpio, it's going to be like the emphasis of everything that we know about a full moon being letting go, shedding things, purging things, letting go of what no longer serves us on a much larger level, in a more intense way. So it just goes back to this idea that Scorpio is like, hitting rock bottom and then the phoenix rising from the ashes. It doesn't mean you're going to die that day. It just means that, there might be a part of your life that no longer serves a purpose here and you have to say goodbye to it, and it's going to be in your best interest. So I always try to tell people it's something to look forward to. And I'm saying this as a Scorpio rising. So this is happening in my first house. Having full moons in your first house can be a little bit daunting, because it's really asking you to, step away from a certain version of yourself, or have to let go of certain, whether it be personality traits or things that you cling to, whatever it may be, that's kind of latched and heavily identified with who you are at this moment, but is absolutely hindering you and holding you back. So I'm going to talk about how this is going to, affect all the signs today. But first, let's talk about these aspects happening. So we know that the Taurus solar eclipse happened on April 30th, and that was the first kind of opening of the door of this portal that we're currently in. I know when Marin talks about the eclipses, she says, I think it's such a perfect example that between the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse is very similar to the energy of, that time between Christmas and New Year's, where it's just kind of like, what's going on? I feel weird. I feel like I'm suspended in time and nothing really feels real. And I think that's so true, because between those two eclipses is this very, I don't want to say erratic, because I don't think for everybody it's very chaotic. I'm sure for some, for others it may be more so, but it's this almost like suspended time period where it's more susceptible to things kind of unexpectedly happening, or unexpectedly falling through, or unexpectedly coming together too. It doesn't have to necessarily be anything bad, but because we're in this first kind of opening of the book of what the next 6 months is going to look like, there's a lot of intensity in the air. And then throwing that into Scorpio, and then throwing that into Pluto retrograde, and then throwing that into Mercury retrograde, we have a lot of things going on where it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. But then by retracing our steps, we're able to have a clearer perspective. So it can kind of feel like a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of ups and downs, but that's also what Scorpio is all about, right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on. We do have a mixed bag of the aspects that are going to be happening to the full moon. So we do have a lot of trines, which is good. We want to see more so harmonious aspects when it comes to eclipses, because at least it's kind of like the promise that whatever intensity comes onto our table is in our best interest, even if we don't necessarily see it right away in that moment. There is some squares, there's some oppositions here, nothing too crazy, and I'm going to go over all of it with you. So the first thing we're going to look at is this full moon lunar eclipse is going to be opposite Mercury retrograde in Gemini. So Mercury is stationed retrograde, or will be stationing retrograde depending on when you're listening to this, on May 10th. And we know that retrogrades simply just mean, slowing down and looking at things a little bit deeper. I think there's a huge misconception that when any planet goes retrograde, it's bad. It means the universe is against us. Everything's going to go wrong. Everything's going to break. And it can certainly be true when it comes to Mercury, because Mercury, while it is the planet of communication, it gets limited to this planet of like, oh, it's just our conversations. It's, our phones and stuff like that. But Mercury is literally the connection between getting from point A to point B in anything in our life. So this is driving, this is sending an email, this is, pitching a conversation or something like that. It's really like the inner workings of our everyday life. So to have, those setbacks and obstacles and things going wrong when it comes to such small details, it's almost far more annoying than something like, maybe Venus going retrograde, which typically points like to our love and our finances. Mercury going retrograde, I understand why it can feel like this is so annoying and it's going to be for the next 3 weeks, but it's not something that we have to necessarily dread if we're prepared for it and we know what to look out for, when it's happening, what's going on, etc. So when things go wrong during Mercury retrograde, it's hard because we live in like a capitalistic society where we're supposed to be hustling all the time. We need to get things done on time. We like to rush. We like to make sure we're productive as possible. And that's not what Mercury retrograde wants you to do. It wants you to drop all that, stop the expectations around needing everything to get done, sooner rather than later, and look into things a little bit deeper. And it'll force you to look into these things deeper by making a project fall through, or by making you, not double check that you just paid for something 3 times over by accident. And that'll kind of teach you the lesson of you needing to pay more attention to your finances, or some business that you really wanted to launch suddenly going wrong and you didn't have all the details together. But then later on, after Mercury goes direct, you realize, thank God that happened then, because if it happened now, it would be a lot more expensive and a lot more stressful. And it can even come down to the same idea of, people always saying that their exes come back into the picture, right? Somebody from your past messages you. And I don't even like to always tell people, oh, don't answer. Oh, it's a bad thing, because it's not always a bad thing. And sometimes we need to have people from our past come back and say something, not because it's always going to be in our best interest as far as growth, especially if this person was awful to us. But it'll kind of give you that moment, even just within yourself, to give yourself closure, to double check if you've learned a lesson here, to kind of gauge if you're still tempted to interact with somebody that you thought you had learned a lesson with completely. And sometimes it is good to, speak during Mercury retrograde, because it is that window of like suspension and backtracking and trying again. And it could very well be, you doing a second round of a relationship or a friendship or a connection with somebody that actually ends up going very well this time around. As well as the same idea of maybe starting a business again that failed in the past, starting a project again that fell through, a year ago, and being more prepared this time around. It's very karmic, and I would say it's kind of the entire spectrum of good and bad regarding second chances, trying again, looking at something deeper, and seeing where you stand on the spectrum of learning lessons. And that's how I point to the fact that it's really working in your favor rather than against you. It's just a lot of the times, when our car is breaking down very randomly, very unexpectedly, or we realize that somebody blocked us, or we're suddenly really tight on money, it can feel like, this sucks, why me? But it's usually always, you want to look a little bit deeper into it and ask yourself, okay, why is this happening for real? What is this pointing to? And how is this something that I can take accountability for? That way I don't make this mistake again for myself in the future. So that's what's happening on May 10th, and that's the beginning of Mercury retrograde. And we're going to be having an opposition with the full moon lunar eclipse to Mercury in retrograde. So it's in Gemini. Gemini is happy to have Mercury here. It's in its home sign. It functions really well here. It's very fluid when it comes to communication. It's really emphasizing things like your immediate environment, cars, best friends, siblings, your neighborhood, your everyday conversations, the content that you consume every single day, things that are really present in your everyday life. So there could be this over analytical, over emotional, irrational, tension, or a need for balance between feelings versus logic, because now we're kind of dealing with the full moon in Scorpio, which is very intense, very emotionally intense, a lot of purging, a lot of crying, a lot of feeling, a lot of anger, a lot of everything at once, and having an opposition to Mercury just trying to make the connections and the conclusions and connect point A to point B and connect all the dots in their head. It's kind of this energy of trying to squeeze what is a very tumultuous type of mucky feeling of emotion with Scorpio and turn it into like an Excel sheet. Like there's this need for organization of those thoughts, and it can kind of be the over intellectualization or over analyzing of said feelings. So this could look like thoughts kind of turning inward and becoming more introspective and needing to take a deeper look. We're also going to have an opposition to the North Node in Taurus, obviously, because we're going to have, the nodes are always opposite each other, and that's where the eclipses are going to happen, is in those same same signs that the nodes are currently in. So again, that's why we had the solar eclipse in Taurus on April 30th, and now we're in the lunar eclipse in Scorpio on the 16th. So lots of heightened intuition, fated events, the need to understand the deeper underlying factors of both what you're encouraged to prioritize versus what you're being guided to let go of, and identifying where there's resistance between those two things and why. And this is something that we would typically notice with any of the nodal transits for everybody collectively. So wherever Scorpio and Taurus is in your chart, it's not to say Scorpio's bad this year and Taurus is, almighty and you can't do any wrong in the house of Taurus. It's just that having this opposition here is really pointing to the fact that our Scorpio area of our chart is something that we're used to. We've conquered, we've mastered it. We're very well versed in this area. Taurus, we need a little bit of work on. We need to kind of brushing up our skills, stand back up, and create a stronger foundation. So I would say that with having the opposition to the full moon here, there's obviously going to be this thing where maybe you need to let go of something, but you can't quite loosen your grip yet, and just being like, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if, this is intimidating. I wasn't prepared for this. I don't think I'm strong enough. And that's everything that comes with full moons to begin with. But because this is an eclipse, it's happening on a much, stronger level, a heightened level. And again, that's something you should be excited for, because I really like to see eclipses as like knowing, probably being very self-aware, because most of the time we know what we need to do to get our lives together. We just don't. And it's because we're scared, or we're not ready, or we don't think we'll ever be ready. And those eclipses kind of step in, as well as the nodal transits, to kind of be like, all right, if you're not going to handle it, I'm going to handle it for you, because you need to. And you're going to spend your whole life sitting here putting it off and then wonder why you didn't make any progress. So I think this opposition here is more so working in our favor, even though it can cause a little bit of tension. We also have a square to Saturn in Aquarius. So feeling very grounded or restricted in this area, alongside the theme of the lunar eclipse. So while we're letting go of what resides in Scorpio, Aquarius in our chart might be, challenging our ability to feel confident in loosening that grip, or strengthening even the conflicts of our circumstances. So Saturn's been in Aquarius since like early 2020. This is not new energy. We've been pretty accustomed to it for a while now. So wherever Aquarius rules in your chart is where you might feel this anchor of weight, where, with the letting go of the Scorpio and the being guided to move towards the Taurus, it's like you're fully aware of that. You have the GPS, you have the map, but it can feel like, I can't go to Taurus yet because this Aquarius problem keeps popping up. So for example, I'm a Scorpio rising. I have the South Node in the letting go energy transiting my first house of self and identity, who I am, needing to let go of parts of myself in order to, build a stronger foundation in my interpersonal relationships, because I have Taurus residing in my 7th house of relationships and commitments. So because I naturally have Aquarius in my 4th house of home and family, Saturn is transiting there. So while I have an opposition between these two nodes here, this need for balance between self versus relationships, I have this heavy weight anchoring in my 4th house of home and family, where it's like, yeah, I would love to build a perfect relationship this year. I would love to be able to commit a lot stronger when it comes to my close relationships. However, because I'm dealing with a lot of family problems right now and a tough living situation, it's hard for me to feel stable at all. So you can kind of see how Saturn here is throwing itself in the mix and creating a little bit more conflict. However, like always, I have to remind you that Saturn is a good planet. It is very karmic, and it is very tough and challenging and trying. However, it does want the best for you, and it's usually stressing you out in that area so much, because it's like, girl, you got to get your shit together over here. And Saturn's similar to the nodes in the sense that they don't let you get away with things. They will push and push and push, because they know you're avoiding that area of your life. They know that you're trying to kind of dodge the circumstances and cross your fingers, close your eyes, and hope it blows over. So wherever we have Saturn and Aquarius in our chart is where we kind of want to, at least intentionally acknowledge that area of our chart, while it might be trying and challenging right now, again, look a little bit deeper. Usually we can pick apart astrologically, like when something's happening, yes, we can have a tough aspect or a really challenging transit or something that we're dealing with in our own natal charts. But a lot of the time, it's a lot easier to just zoom out and absorb it for what it is and see, oh, okay, I'm going through this right now, just like I did a few years ago, because I got to learn this, because if I didn't, I would just always put it off and I would literally stay stagnant my entire life. So it's that same idea, just that Saturn here, it might be asking you more so, I don't want to say, oh, it's just causing problems, but it's more so probably asking you to mature. and stand up straight in that area and be a little bit more disciplined. That way you can kind of create a confident bridge between the opposition between the North Node and the South Node. And this full moon of the letting go energy is going to be one of those first steps into kind of clearing out room to make room for that Taurus North Node. We're also going to be having a trine to Mars in Aries, so wanting to make a change, break free, and really get moving. With the square to Saturn, it's kind of like we're slamming on the gas and the brakes at the same time. However, because we have a positive, harmonious aspect here with Mars, it's a little bit more supportive. We have more drive to be relentless with our approach. We also have a trine to Jupiter in Aries as well, so also in support of leaning into faith and seeing a far more, I would say, positive outcome upon this goodbye, rather than, oh my God, this is so painful, I'm not going to survive this. Like, it's kind of like knowing you need to say goodbye and almost being nervously excited for it. You just don't want to do that final move that it takes to let go of whatever it is. But when you do, it's sort of like the world is kind of opening back up for us. So a lot of new opportunities, or even very just positive synchronicities can start to pop up for you. We also have a trine to Neptune in Pisces. So I feel like Neptune's influence here is just kind of throwing a very emotional veil over what's become a cocktail of freedom and restriction. So this more so signifies coming full circle and drawing the larger lesson out of a seemingly dramatic circumstance, you know? So I feel like with the haziness that Neptune is, it has this tendency to maybe over romanticize something that you know is bad and not wanting to let go of it in that way, but also kind of, again, the same idea of Jupiter opening the world back up for you, where this can be a very spiritual, almost cathartic sort of purge, where rather than just breaking up with someone, I feel like this is someone throwing out the whole state that they dated this person in and really, you know, doing it on a larger scale. We also have a sextile to Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. So I made another video about Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. I'm going to link it in the description. That way you can watch it and get a little bit more context. But again, this is really just pointing to the destruction of what's no longer working, with an emphasis on power and control dynamics. And then lastly, we have Venus conjunct Chiron in the sky during all of this. So Venus is really going to introduce our love and finances into the mix. However, since it rules the archetype of women, and it's an intense aspect to the wounded healer, there's a strong emphasis on, you know, quote unquote, the wounded feminine. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we see women's rights being robbed right before our eyes once again. Not very shocking, but this aspect on its own literally concludes that it's like women are in a victimized position currently. So it's not very promising collectively. However, in our personal lives, this may more so indicate acting out from a place of insecurity, fear of abandonment, the chip on our shoulder, you know, lots of healing needing to be done. And with this present within the full moon, again, it goes back to this idea of purging. The thing here is that I don't think this is going to be a graceful full moon eclipse. I feel like this is going to be an intense kind of like blowout argument, running away, having the breakdown in order to have the breakthrough type of energy. And that's not, you know, it doesn't even have to be a bad thing. Sometimes it needs to happen that way in order to really pin the nail in the coffin. Otherwise, it could be this very passive kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out situation. But with Chiron active here, I feel like a lot of people glaze over Chiron's influence. It's pretty strong. This is a very like wounded planet around where we have trauma and where we have sensitivities. So having this conjunct Venus, the planet of love, money, and beauty, our comfort, our pleasure, what feels good to us, it's kind of like along all of this letting go, needing to build a foundation, knowing where you need to stop going so hard, but also knowing where you need to be more stable. All of the feelings that come with that, you know, we're all children on the inside, and we all have our own fears and our insecurities and the things that we want. And having this very present, as well as all this energy going on, already being pretty tumultuous and erratic, I would say you want to check in with yourself and make sure that you're not acting out of too much out of a place of pain or insecurity. So for example, I would encourage the blowout argument. I would encourage the having the breakdown. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to restrict yourself, but you want to be careful when it comes to maybe displacing your anger. And for example, if you're fighting with your boyfriend, don't go off on your mom about how awful of a mom she is, because that's coming from a wounded place where maybe you felt like an insecurity started with the relationship with your mom and then carried into your relationship, and your romantic relationship really damaged you. So now it's like, I'm mad at mom again. You want to be careful that you're watching where you're drawing your pain from and then where you're putting it back down. It could also just be, you know, self-inflicted as well, and you want to make sure that you don't start hating yourself or telling yourself you don't deserve certain things, or everything's always going to be this way, no one's ever going to love you, nothing's ever going to work out for you. Once you start doing that, you're going to drive yourself into a hole. And that's literally what the South Node in Scorpio is saying. It's saying stop going to those immediate fixes, those immediate ways of thinking, those immediate narratives. Stop doing the things that feel like victimizing, because while it might feel good in that moment, it's destroying you. And you want to lean into Taurus, which is going to wipe itself off, be like, this sucks, this is very annoying, might be angry for a little bit, but it's going to create a very practical plan to get itself out of that situation and make sure you're never put back in this position again. So do you see how it could be a little bit challenging? Because it's kind of like we're being tested and almost thrown directly into the thing that we know is very triggering for us, but it's like exposure therapy. And being thrown into this, is going to teach us how to swim. That way it's not something that has so much power over us anymore. Before I get into how this is going to affect everybody directly, please go by your rising sign. That way it can be the most accurate for you, as that's going to be the thing to help me determine the structure of your house system. And for more context, I highly recommend watching the other videos in the description box, especially the solar eclipse one, but also Pluto retrograde. That's going to help you give some more context and understand how those things work as a whole, as their own concept. But then as I talk about how they fall into the areas of your chart, it'll start to make more sense to you. Okay, I have power and control dynamics here. I need to let go of this area. I need to be guided to this area, and see how it all comes together as a cohesive story. Aries risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 8th house of sex, death, taxes, but really things that you share with other people. You have the North Node in the 2nd house of your personal finances, your belongings, your values, everything that belongs to you. So because of this axis here, the 8th house and the 2nd house, the themes that they share that are kind of this underlying common denominator between the two is it's things that belong to us, right? It's money, but it's also opinions and values, the things that we care about. But with the axis of this dipping into the 8th house now involving other people, it's the transactional relationships we have with people. It's the things that we share within the bond with them, whether that's literal, like money or a lease, or metaphorical when it comes to secrets and intimacy. So in order to embark on that North Node in your 2nd house and building a stronger foundation for yourself, your values, your money, what belongs to you, what you're proud of, you need to loosen the grip on what other people think of you, on their opinions, on their expectations of you, on your possible tendency to rely on those people for those things as well. Again, whether it is money or validation, whatever it may be. And with Saturn in the 11th house, there might be this anchoring sort of stressor in the background, or a little bit of a need for more structure when it comes to the groups that you associate with, your friendships, really your sense of belonging, because the 11th house is going after your dreams. And since you're being asked to focus on your money and things you're proud of this year, those two things really need to be cohesive together. And with the 8th house being the thing that you kind of need to let go of right now, in order to guide yourself onto that path, you're going to have to stop caring about, or at least prioritizing, what other people think of you, what they have to say about it, and your dependency on them in order to build a stronger foundation within yourself. Taurus risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 7th house of relationships and commitments. So you have the North Node in your 1st house. You're really the star of the show, the main character for the next year or so, because you're getting really the celebratory aspect of having the North Node, what we're being guided to focus on, transit through your 1st house of self and identity. So you're kind of having this identity, moment where you're stepping into yourself rather than an identity crisis. It might kind of come through some confusion, or really feeling, not so stable right now in the moment of who you are. But by the time the next eclipses come into the fall, you'll have a much clearer idea. But in order to, step into that version of yourself, you have to let go of some things around commitments and relationships. So don't get scared. This isn't me saying if you're in a relationship, you have to break up with this person in order to find yourself. It doesn't have to be that black and white. But if there's any sort of codependency or something where you limit yourself or hinder yourself because of your partner, and it doesn't have to be romantic either, it could be somebody close to you, you really want to refrain from doing that because it's going to hinder you. So you also have Saturn anchoring itself in your 10th house. So maybe some conflict or just a need for structure in your career sector, your legacy, the life that you really want to live here, your accomplishments, your success. So this could look like an issue where, for example, let's say you get a job opportunity to move to a different city and it's your dream job and you're super excited, but you're dating somebody and they're not ready to move and they don't want you to move and they still want to be with you. They're excited for you, but it's a stressful situation. This is something where you're being encouraged to really lean into yourself. Relationships will come later. It doesn't mean that you'll never be able to speak to this person again and you'll be able to figure things out. And that's just one example, but you're really being asked to prioritize yourself here. And with the full moon in your 7th house, there could be some aspect of purging or letting go around whether it's just actual relationships or just the ideologies that you have or the limited beliefs that you have or the storylines that you have current in your interpersonal relationships in order for you to build a stronger sense of self. Gemini risings, this full moon is happening in your 6th house of work, everyday routine, and health. So you have the North Node in your 12th house, and the 12th house we know is like your psyche, your intuition, your dreams, your subconscious, really healing. So having the North Node there is really asking you to prioritize those things. But in order to do that, you need to let go of some things that you have going on in the 6th house. So this is an interesting axis because it's not to say in order to focus on your psyche, you need to stop caring about your physical health, but it's more so saying that yes, having a routine is good. Yes, being productive is good. Yes, working is good. But sometimes those things are just used as the filler to convince ourselves we're being, an active member in society and we're doing well for ourselves and we're healthy because we have our things together on paper. But a lot of the times it's kind of either a distraction or almost like a justification for what we're dealing with in our head. For example, maybe being very depressed, but being like, well, I don't know why, because I'm making a lot of money, I'm working out, I'm getting a lot done at work, but you're really being asked to look deeper into that 12th house with your focus there. It's saying it's time to kind of get into your solitude and figure out what's good for you rather than what makes you look good to other people, or rather than even worrying about other people as a whole, really pouring into yourself and making sure that your brain is healthy. And with Saturn in the 9th house anchoring in there, it's really, indicating a challenge or a need for some more structure within your belief system, your faith, and your education. So the 9th house is education, but it's more so knowledge through philosophy. So learning through experience and having a larger scope of what the world and what life and even what love means to you as a whole, like in a very spiritual sense. So to have the North Node in the 12th house, it's saying it wants you to kind of strengthen your ability to be alone with your thoughts, to feel very mindful, to feel very, healthy and balanced in the prison that is your mind, basically. And in order to do that, you have Saturn in your 9th house saying it's time to get more serious about your faith. It's time to get more serious about the way that you look at things, your knowledge, your life experience, etc. So with the South Node in the 6th house, it's not to say stop worrying about your workout routine, stop eating healthy, things like that. In fact, I would encourage those things. It's more so saying working, being productive, just doing these things where you're booked and busy isn't proof that you're doing well in life. The proof would be that you don't feel you need to do those things because you're liberated through something like faith, your belief system, your sense of self, and being able to kind of feel very confident in your subconscious when you're alone with yourself and your healing purposes as well. Cancer risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 5th house. So the 5th house is arguably, all of the fun stuff, right? It's sex, romance, entertainment, singing, dancing, art, music, creativity. It's really our inner child. It's an exciting place in the birth chart. So having the South Node here and having the full moon here, there might be some sort of purging of overindulgence or kind of playing without the work aspect. So having the North Node in your 11th house is saying it's time to focus on a sense of community. It's time to focus on figuring out where you belong and going after your dreams and actually having this big, vision for yourself. And you have Saturn anchoring here in your 7th house, or I'm sorry, not your 7th house, your 8th house of, things that belong to other people, things that you share with other people, things that are very transactional, whether it's literal or metaphorical. So for example, sharing a lease with somebody, but also sharing secrets with somebody and the intimacy that comes with that. So having the South Node and the eclipse happening here in your 5th house, I feel like it's almost saying you need to take yourself more seriously, because the 5th house is like where we like to go out to restaurants. It's where we like to hook up with people we don't know. It's where we like to spend all day kind of playing around with our head in the clouds, not really worrying about getting anything done. And that's okay in moderation. But having the North Node in the 11th house is almost like it's time to have fun, but in a big girl way, in a way where you're stepping up to plate and you're doing it in a way that's going to benefit you and set you up for success. So with Saturn in the 8th house, there might be this challenge or need to find more structure within what you share with other people. And this almost makes me think of like, if you're in a career where you have the ability to like move up the scale, it might be saying it's time to get more serious about your business relationships, or it's time to get more serious about the people that you surround yourself with, because there's always this saying too that, what is it? Like you're the average of the 5 people that you keep around you. So there's this like cycling storyline around your dreams and those being affected by the environment that you're in, the people that you share these dreams with, the people that are either encouraging you or hindering you in that way. And in order to kind of find that sense of belonging and find that community, find that group that feels like home for you and go after the dreams that you want, you're going to have to get a little bit more structured and serious around your intake of like overindulging in things that should be treated more so as a reward or a celebration rather than something that's just always happening and never really changing. So for example, this makes me think of someone who really wants to be, let's say, like this killer real estate agent, but they're not always prioritizing their business connections. They're more so going out saying they're quote unquote networking, but they're just like drinking all the time, right? And not really making a lot of progress in their career. And that could be this sort of idea where it's like, okay, try not to focus and prioritize the fun aspect too much. You can still have fun, but do it in an environment that's going to propel you towards your dreams a little bit closer. This could also too just look like, focusing less on me, and focusing more on where do I belong and where can I celebrate other people and help other people with the skills that I already have. And again, with Saturn in the 8th house, this is kind of emphasizing a very transformational aspect of what this process is going to look like for you, having to let go of certain things and having to bring new things in order to really focus on a sense of belonging and a connection that you can build with other people that's going to help skyrocket towards, going right after your dreams. Leo risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 4th house of home and family, even things like property and real estate where you live, and you currently have the North Node transiting your 10th house of your career sector, your legacy, your accomplishments, your success, your career, etc. So what this is telling us is that in order for you to really step into yourself and feel like you're living the life that you want to live and becoming more successful and en route to something that's going to be very abundant for you, especially career-wise, you need to be in an environment and around family or just the actual home itself that embraces that and that allows you to be inspired to go towards that. So this really just makes me think that you're moving, honestly, with Leo risings, and particularly because this is hitting your cadent houses, so your 4th versus your 10th, two really important pillars in your life, where you live, your home, your family versus your career. There's a lot of emphasis on the opposition for the two, and you're really being asked to let go of feeling like you owe your family things, or feeling like you need to depend on them, or feeling like you need to be caught up in their drama when you have your own things that you need to be prioritizing and worrying about. This makes me think that you're letting go of either the house itself and like moving out of something, or letting go of maybe the emphasis on the control or the power dynamics that your family has on you currently, whether that's them being like, we want you to do good, but we don't want you to move too far away from us, or you should live closer because we might need your help with X, Y, and Z, and needing to step up and realize, okay, I love my family, or even if you struggle with your family, knowing I cannot let this be such a big role in my life anymore. I really need to start focusing on my own legacy that I'm leaving here. So in order to kind of embark on that North Node in the 10th house, you're going to have to let go of some of those themes. And with Saturn in your 7th house, this could look like some conflicting interpersonal relationship aspects, or just the need to kind of have more structure in the bonds that you share with people. So Saturn transiting your 7th house is a little tough in general, just because it's kind of putting a stressor on the people that you're super close with. So if we look at this like a cohesive story, it's basically saying you need to melt away from your comfort zone. You need to be okay with certain relationships dissolving. You need to be okay with, stepping away from maybe some familial ties or things like that, or just moving into a better environment. That way you can really approach with open arms that career, that legacy, those accomplishments, that success that you want so deeply. Virgo risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 3rd house of your everyday routine, communication, the content you intake, all of those things. And the North Node is in your 9th house. So you're really being asked to focus on your perspective on life for the next year. So your philosophy on life, and really learning through experience and pushing to that point by broadening your horizons. So, getting out of your normal routine, traveling to a place you've never been before, learning something new that you haven't fully immersed yourself into. And having the lunar eclipse, the South Node in your 3rd house, is basically saying it's okay for you to get out of your comfort zone sometimes. You need to start letting go of what's familiar to you just because it's familiar to you, just because you've been doing it for X, Y, and Z, however long, just because so-and-so is doing it, and really start to focus yourself and pivot on your own path that might stray you away from the things that feel very familiar to you. So your 3rd house is pretty mundane, right? Like it's like the car you drive and your neighbors and the people you see every day and the things that you watch on social media. And in order to really embark on opening, again, your horizons of your mind, thinking bigger, expanding your perspective, you need to get out of that very tight framework that keeps you in the same environment, both literally your physical environment, but also your mental environment, and thinking the same thoughts every single day. So switching up your daily routine, or switching up the way that you think about things, or switching up your immediate response to things in order to see, okay, well, if I do it this way and experiment with maybe trying this or thinking this way or getting out of my comfort zone, I can see how I'm having, mental stimulation and growth in my perspective and my philosophy, and maybe even learning something new that could be a little bit more spiritual for you. But with Saturn in the 6th house, you're having this anchoring sort of challenge, or maybe just a need for more structure in your daily routine, because the 6th house, again, it is very mundane, but it's like the food that you eat, the way that you take care of your body, the way that you prioritize your work and how booked and busy you are. So if we look at this like a cohesive story, it's saying you need to push out of, or you need to let go of the things that feel very comfortable to you because they're probably hindering you. And in order to kind of embark on making the world open up a little bit bigger for you, whether that's through traveling, experiences, education, whatever it may be, you need to take your daily routine a little bit more seriously and start feeding yourself good things. Start treating your body a little bit more positive. Start creating this environment within your own body and within your own everyday routine that invites in new experiences. Because if you're sitting around doing the same thing every day, you can't really expect many things to change. Libra risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 2nd house of finances, things that belong to you, possessions, values, etc. And you have the North Node currently in the 8th house. So the 8th house we know is the things that we share with other people. It's really the, sex, death, and transformation aspect of our entire life, and the things that we share with the people around us, whether it's literal, so things like a lease or money, or, metaphysical in the sense of like secrets or trust that we share with other people. So in order to build those connections and build intimacy and get a little bit deeper on even shared investments, if we're talking more financially, you need to kind of move away from and let go of what only belongs to you. And I know this is interesting because it's not me necessarily saying you need to stop being so selfish, but it's saying that there might be this tendency to kind of cling to what is mine, what I don't want to share, what I don't want other people touching, what I don't want other people influencing. And that's okay to a certain degree, but you've mastered that energy, right? You've conquered it, and you're being asked to more so lean into, how can I open myself up more to shared connections with people, things that I can go in together with somebody. That way I'm not completely depending on myself. This could even just look like asking for help. And you have Saturn currently transiting your 5th house, and the 5th house is arguably like one of the best houses, right? It's really fun. It's like sex, indulgence, romance, creativity, things that really light up our inner child. So having Saturn transit here could just honestly look like a dry spell between like pleasure in your life, whether that's, something sexual or something when it just comes to feeling good. And having the North Node in the 8th house is saying, it's time for you to focus on this big transformation you're having, right? The 8th house is deep. And while it is money, it is things we share with people, it is intimacy, it is very personal to you. And it's kind of letting go. It's really emphasizing the Scorpio aspect of letting go of what no longer works for you as a whole in your life and stepping into a newer version of yourself. And in order to do that, you're going to have to let go of maybe even physical things lying around your house that just have bad energy that an ex gave to you, or it's just something that, is taking up space and you don't really feel good about it, all the way down to that being a metaphorical thing as well. Values that you hold on to so strongly, or limited beliefs that you have, or storylines that you tell yourself that aren't really serving you. They're just keeping you in a tougher spot, and you might be just keeping them around because you're used to it. But in order to, again, embark on that North Node of transformation and change within yourself, you need to kind of have this dry spell period. You need to kind of be revoked of the things that you typically use to feel really good, to escape to distract yourself from, in order to get real and see what you're really dealing with on the table and get serious about what's staying, what's coming with you, and having the transformation within the both of those. Scorpio risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 1st house of self and identity, what you look like, who you are. And the North Node is in your 7th house of relationships and commitment. So you're being really asked to focus on this year your interpersonal relationships, strengthening them, and creating a stronger foundation in this area of your chart. But in order to do that, you need to let go of certain aspects of yourself, whether that's the way that you feel about yourself, the values that you have, maybe being too self-centered when it comes to your relationships, focusing too much on your end of the stick. and having to step away from like certain, I would even say just like mannerisms or aspects of yourself, in the sense that maybe you act a certain way when you're triggered. Maybe you do a certain thing when you're hurt. Maybe you assume a certain thing when you think that somebody, isn't valuing you, and having to step away from those things in order to build that stronger foundation in your relationships. You have Saturn anchoring itself, so creating a little bit of challenge or just a need for stronger structure in your 4th house of home and family and living situation. So this could be something where it might be harder to get along with a partner right now because you might be in a stressful situation as far as like a literal house, like a lease or a mortgage or finding a place to live, etc. However, this could also look like struggling with your interpersonal relationships because your family and you are not maybe getting along really well, or maybe there's a lot of things up in the air when it comes to what you're dealing with privately, because we know that the 4th house is also like who you are at the core, and because yourself, your identity, your 1st house is so involved here, it's kind of like knowing you need to focus on strengthening your relationships, but having these two things pulling away from you and being like, well, how am I going to strengthen my relationships if I don't even know who I am right now? If I'm struggling to even figure out, what's important to me, what my values are, who I am at the core, and then having this weight of your family also putting pressure on you in that way as well. So this is going to be a little bit tougher for you just because you're getting the tougher end of the stick in the sense of the nodes transiting through such an intimate area of your chart. But I would say it's in your best interest to let go of what you know no longer serves you when it comes to what you're in control of and how you respond to things. So if you get very triggered, try to walk away before that happens. If you know that you snap at people when you're very upset, try to leave before it gets to that point. If you know that your family responds a certain way when you share certain things with them, do not share certain things with them, and trying to just take advantage of what you can do in your control. That way you can build boundaries and a stronger foundation in all of your interpersonal relationships. Sagittarius risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 12th house of your psyche, your dreams, your intuition, endings, solitude, everything that really happens alone in our psyche, very spiritually and very metaphysically. It's a very mystical house. And you have the North Node in your 6th house, so you're actually really being asked to focus on like your health this year and your everyday routines, the things that really are small details in your everyday life, but how it amounts to you having a larger, route to success. So you have Saturn anchoring, so creating a little bit of conflict or struggle or just a need for structure in your 3rd house of your everyday routine. So to have so much energy between your 6th house and your 3rd house, they're very similar, right? They're both ruled by Mercury, which is the planet of communication. So speaking, talking, writing, the content you consume, the conversations you have, but also like what you do in your everyday life, like what car you drive, what neighborhood you live in, what you do when you have free time, what you do when a certain conversation comes up, and kind of the same, it points to having the same sort of thoughts and ideas and routine bumping around in your everyday life. So with your 12th house and having the South Node here and the letting go energy here, you might be asked to let go of things that literally just no longer serve you when it comes to like insecurities, tendencies, addictions, even escapism, like watching too much Netflix, things like that, in order to build a stronger structure for yourself when it comes to how productive you can be, how well you can take care of yourself, and the opportunities that start to pop up once you realize how much free time you have when you stop filling your day with things that are just kind of like a crutch. Does that make sense? So for example, like having the North Node in the 6th house is saying, okay, it's time to take yourself more seriously now. It's time to fill your schedule, get booked and busy, start working out, start taking care of the way that you eat, start taking care of, things that are going to help you get to a more successful point in your life by working hard and working with other people as well, doing things for other people, being of service to other people. But in order to do that, you need to step away from maybe being a little bit too in your head for a little bit. With the 12th house being like your psyche, what you do to kind of self-soothe, it's not saying you're not allowed to do that anymore. But with Saturn in the 3rd house, there might have been this challenge, especially, it's been here for a while, challenge within your everyday routine where like the people you've always been close to are maybe not that close to you anymore. The things that you do in your everyday environment are starting to get really boring. Or maybe there's just this dry spell energy around your life being super exciting anymore. And in order to to kind of rev that momentum back up, you need to start implicating things in your everyday routine to kind of brighten the aspect of your life, because unfortunately no one's going to come knock on your door and like give you this exciting new opportunity if you don't put yourself out there to do that. And in order to do that, you literally need to get out of your head, get out of your house, get out of your solitude, and better position yourself. Capricorn, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 11th house of friends, associates, community, groups, social media, the world at large, manifestations, etc. And you have the North Node in the 5th house. So I love this for you, because having the North Node transit here is basically saying you get to focus on all the fun stuff for the next year and a half. The 5th house is really like sex, pleasure, romance, creativity, letting your inner child come out, all these very fun, creative, childlike joy type of themes. So to have the South Node in the 11th house and having the lunar eclipse here, you need to let go of what people think about you. You need to let go of societal standards. You need to let go of what you think you need to do in order to belong or in order to fit in, and really lean into the things that make you you and make you feel good and are fun for you. I would argue that, you know, with Saturn too in your 2nd house of personal values, things that are important to you, self-worth, etc., there might be this like testing of like trials and tribulations when it comes to like you being able to be confident in yourself, even in situations or environments where you don't feel super welcomed or you don't feel super, you know, accepted. And having Saturn here is kind of pointing to the fact that there might be like a dry spell in possessions and things that belong to you, and like having something of your own for a while now. So in order to really enjoy this North Node in the 5th house, saying do what you want, do what feels good, enjoy yourself, do what's going to light up, you know, the inner child inside of you. The only way you'll be able to do that is by letting go of what everybody else thinks, what everybody else feels, the need to fit in, the need to be accepted, the need to have a certain amount of likes on social media, and the need to even like do this entire dream at a large scale. Especially just being a Capricorn rising, like you're very relentless when it comes to your approach to be so determined to go after what you want and pull off a really big goal. And this isn't saying you can't do that, but instead of focusing on this big, huge end result, focus on the fun of the journey to get there. So instead of just a win, 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 I need to get to the finish line, like I need to pull this off completely right now, focus on the fun aspect and the struggle and the journey and the fun stuff and the pleasure and the joy and the, you know, mishaps that happen, all with the North Node in the 5th house, because it's saying you need to lean into that side of yourself in order to really grow. If you keep focusing on everybody else, fitting in, you know, this sense of needing to belong somewhere, it's going to hinder you, and it's going to put a damper on the talents and the creativity and the skills and the pleasure that's actually very available to you right now. Aquarius risings, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 10th house of your career sector, your public image, your persona, your reputation, your accomplishments, and your success. And you have the North Node currently in your 4th house of home and family. So you're really being asked to focus on like your living situation, your family values, how you feel at the core, you know, who you are behind closed doors, and just building a stronger sense of home and family and redefining what that means to you for the next year or so. But in order to do that, in order to fully immerse yourself in those themes, you're going to have to let go of some aspect around your, I guess, public image, and it could involve your career as well. Sometimes when people have this transit, like this is when they're like, I literally cannot do it with my job anymore. Like you could be unhappy for a while now, and this just might be the year that you quit your job. And it doesn't have to mean you're unemployed in order to focus on your family, but it's saying you're focusing more on what feels like home to you, what feels good to you. And maybe that means leaving a corporate job in order to, you know, embark on being an artist and working from home like you've always wanted to do. With Saturn in the 1st house, there's like a little bit of an identity crisis here, because Saturn's been here for a while, and your 1st house is self and identity and who you are. And having Saturn here can feel like you are aging so much in like just a short amount of time. Like you're struggling to figure out the strong structure and like foundation of who you are, and maybe even struggling to figure out what you want. And in order to really do that, you can't just be going to work every single day, distracting yourself, focusing on how much money you have, focusing on how successful you are, how successful people think you are. And you need to start leaning more into, okay, It's time for me to get back to my original values. What's important to me? Who's actually there for me? Who is my family? What does my environment look like? And how does that shape my ability to be the successful person? And with Saturn in the first house, it might be like a testing time for you to figure out exactly who you are. But in order to really progress here, you want to come back to square one and you want to get back to the drawing board, because the more you just focus too much on overworking yourself or making more money or having a cooler reputation online, the more isolated you are going to feel and alone you're going to feel, and the less you're going to know yourself. Pisces rising. So this lunar eclipse is happening in your 9th house of your belief systems, your faith, philosophy, your worldview, expanding your horizons, and you have the North Node in your 3rd house. So this is interesting because you're actually really being asked to focus on like coming back to the drawing board of your everyday life and your immediate environment and taking those things very seriously. We know that the 3rd house is like communication. It's the people you follow on social media. It's the best friends that you have. It's the neighborhood that you live in. It's the car that you drive. And to have the North Node in such a mundane area of your chart is basically saying or stressing the importance of how the little details of your everyday life, whether it's the routine that you have, the thoughts that you think, the people that you follow, those things shape a much larger outcome in the long run, and they need to be taken just as seriously as, you know, going on vacation or as having a spiritual awakening. You know, those little everyday routines and everyday thoughts amount to something much bigger. And if you're in a negative space where maybe you're watching a content creator that's pretty negative and kind of, you know, makes your worldview a little bit more tighter, or makes it seem like the world is a little bit evil, or maybe you're not taking your routine very seriously and every time you have some free time you just dip into some escapism, or you're drinking or something like that. It's kind of saying you need to take what's available to you every single day more seriously and alter it to the best of your ability, because you have Saturn anchoring itself, so creating a little bit of challenge, or at least a need for structure in your 12th house, which is like your psyche, your subconscious, your intuition, what's going on in your head when you're not voluntarily, you know, forcing thoughts. So it's really what we believe when we're not trying to believe something. It's what's bumping around in our head, like what's happening in our dreams, really our spirituality and just our ability to have closure and karma and healing within ourselves. So with this letting go aspect of the 9th house, it's not to say, oh, you can't be spiritual anymore, or oh, you can't be focused on this, you know, larger image of what your life looks like, the big picture, but it's saying to zoom in a little bit closer and focus on the practicality of everything. You need to be, you know, taking your diet seriously. You need to be taking the content you consume seriously and the books that you read seriously. And with Saturn in the 12th house, that's not an easy transit, because this is taxing on like your ability to maybe feel comfortable when you're alone or with your own thoughts, or when you're, you know, if you're panicking or if you're depressed or if you're in a mindset that's a little bit more stressful. It's saying instead of leaning towards that escapism, like if you're having this mental breakdown, instead of being like, oh, I'm just going to go on vacation and forget about it, or oh, I'm just going to go visit my friend across the world, or oh, I'm just going to, you know, watch this video on spirituality. Those are quick fixes for you right now. And you're being asked to really lean into building a stronger foundation when it comes to practical solutions. So learning breathing techniques or reading books that are actually going to teach you a practical skill that you can use to your advantage in your everyday life. Focusing on how you can make that vacation aspect happen in your immediate environment if you enforce it to do so. It's really saying what you kind of have everything that you already need, and instead of looking far and wide for a solution to your problems, you need to start looking within yourself. And in order to do that, again, with Saturn in the 12th house, you need to kind of create more structure in your subconscious. I'm excited for this lunar eclipse, guys. I am a little bit intimidated, for me in particularly. And like I said at the beginning of this, I was like, okay, I'm an astrologer. I need to tell you guys not to be scared. It is nothing to be scared of, but letting go is something that should be very cathartic, right? It shouldn't feel like we're scared, and it shouldn't feel like, oh my God, I don't want this to happen. I'm dreading it. I can't wait for this transit to be over. I see a lot of that on social media. Like, I can't wait for this planet to get out of this sign, or I can't wait for eclipse season to be over. And by rushing through things and closing our eyes and waiting for something to blow over it, we totally miss the point. Like, the whole point is to go through it and not against it. And by having more resistance and ignoring the whole lesson here, that's what's going to keep you stagnant. You can't expect to feel like you're growing in life or feeling like you're expanding if you're constantly sticking to what's comfortable, because more often than not, what's making you comfortable is just keeping you in a small place that feels safe to you, but is actually quite damaging. So I want you guys to see this as a really liberating thing. It's sometimes, you know, nice, maybe this is just the Scorpio rising inside of me, to lean into the unknown or to lean into the lack of control, because sometimes it's nice to just take a back seat to trying to, you know, always have control over every single thing and being so stressed out with the amount of pressure that we put on ourselves with that, and lean into what we're being guided to do, where we're being guided to go, who we're being guided to keep around us. And then it'll seem a lot more cohesive and flow a lot more easier when we're not just forcing these certain circumstances on us. And I'm saying that as a Virgo moon. Like, as a Virgo moon, I want control all the time. I can't even relax without getting stressed out because of the lack of control. But I'm trying to really embrace this energy. It's going to be a good 6 months after this until the next eclipses come in the fall. We get to slow down, relax a little bit, bask in the new energy, feel around, feel what's going on with us. And then those eclipses coming up in the fall is going to shake up the story once again, and we'll be able to see the bigger lesson. And a lot of unexpected stuff is going to come up in the next 6 months, and I'm excited to see where everybody's at. So thank you for listening. Of course, if you guys have any questions or comments, I'm more than happy to elaborate on them. But I'm excited. Good luck to everybody, and thank you for listening.